Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. You know, we've seen a pattern. This happens all the time. There's a big revelation. Walls are closing in. We got Trump. This is it. We got the smoking gun. And then the story fizzles. Oh, we had the date wrong on that email. It wasn't really the thing we thought it was. And then it fizzles, and then a couple of reporters get let go. So this happens about every month. There's a story like, well, here's another one. Now it's happening even faster. So there's another story, and it was about Manafort, which was Trump's old campaign manager. And it says Manafort filing suggests Mueller has evidence of something that starts with C and rhymes with schmolusion. That's from Slate. Here's Chris Hayes is tweeting out an article from Talking Points memo. And it says the campaign manager was secretly funneling campaign data and information to a Russian oligarch closely tied to Russian President Vladimir Putin, someone who had no possible use for such information other than to use it in the Russian efforts to get Donald Trump elected president. Chris Hayes tweeted that out. Everything in that paragraph is complete bullshit. Facts are completely wrong, backwards. And Chris Hayes tweets it out as a quote, so he doesn't take responsibility for it. Because let's just face it, Chris Hayes is diminished, and he's a very small man. Here's another one. It says this week we learned that Paul Manafort provided Trump campaign internal polling data to Konstantin Kilimnik, who Mueller has previously identified as a Russian intelligence operative. This is the most significant Russia-related evidence we've seen. Okay, there they go again, right? So you've heard the story, you've heard about this. They've got him. We got him. Except this is one of the worst stories about this. Here is from The Nation magazine. The Manafort revelation is not a smoking gun. Proponents of the Trump-Russia collusion theory wildly overstate their case again. And here's from that article. It says, according to an accidentally unredacted passage, Mueller believes that Manafort lied about sharing poll data related to the 2016 presidential campaign with Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian national who worked as Manafort's fixer and translator in the Ukraine. Keep that in mind. It's important. Manafort's employment of Kilimnik has fueled speculation because Mueller has stated that Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence service and had such ties in 2016. And this, just to show you how over the top. So let me bring in the gentleman who wrote this article, Aaron Maté from The Nation magazine. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
Hey, Jimmy.
Well, thanks for being with us. Now, can you explain to people what exactly happened? Because let me give a thumbnail and you correct me and fill in all the gaps, okay? So the thumbnail that I got was that Manafort, Trump's old campaign manager, accidentally revealed that he had shared polling data that he wanted to get to two billionaires in the Ukraine, right? And they are saying that shows that he was in collusion with Russia. Now, show me all the ways they're wrong about that.
Well, first of all, what's funny about the story is that even the initial reporting about it was totally wrong, because the initial New York Times story, which helped fuel so much speculation and excitement, was that Manafort wanted this polling data passed to Oleg Deripaska, who is a Russian tycoon. The New York Times the next day corrected that story to say, actually, no, sorry, we meant that Manafort really wanted that data passed to two Ukrainian tycoons, not a Russian tycoon. So, but even there, yeah.
Well, let me just stop you there, Aaron. So now the big story is that we caught Manafort passing secret data to Russian oligarchs connected to Putin. Turns out it wasn't even a Russian; it was somebody from the Ukraine. Correct. So the jumping off point was 100% wrong, right?
Yes, and the thing is, but even if it was Deripaska, the story is still so ridiculous for so many reasons. First of all, the polling data that Manafort wanted passed on, this was in the spring of 2016. So the Republican nomination fight was still going on, although it looked like Trump was wrapping it up, and he wanted it passed on to his business associate, who you mentioned, Konstantin Kilimnik, who worked for Manafort for a long time in the Ukraine as his translator and fixer. And the Times notes that most of this polling data was public. So even if there was some sort of nefarious use for this polling data, most of it was public. So, I mean, it's unclear what exactly it could be used for, although everybody jumped to conclusions that this was proof that Manafort, the only possible reason that Manafort wanted polling data transferred via Kalimnik to either a Russian or to a Ukrainian was that to help the Russian effort to target the U.S. election. But most of it was public to begin with. And then we look into actually what was really going on.
So wait, let me just say, so they're saying that Manafort shared polling data with a Russian who's close to Putin. So why would he do that? And he was doing that to give them the secret data that they could then use to target ads on Facebook and Twitter towards people in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. That's the theory. That's the theory. Because Russia couldn't get that data anywhere else, except you just revealed that data was public anyway.
Most of it was public, and it's polling data from the spring of 2016.
Yeah, and it's polling data from the spring of 2016.
So how that could possibly be used for some secret plot to determine the election or influence the election in any way, it is beyond me. And the fact is that we know the Russians, no matter like even if the Russians had gotten some crazy secretive polling data from Manafort, which they didn't in this case, even if they had gotten it. We know that they didn't do anything with it because, their juvenile Facebook ads were targeted not even really at the swing states. There was like a very small amount of money that was spent on the states like Michigan and Wisconsin, but that was mostly during the primaries, which would have been after they got the secret polling data from Manafort, which they didn't even get. So the whole story is totally implausible. And what is actually going on is quite obvious to see. Manafort was owed money by these Ukrainians who he actually wanted the polling data sent to, not Deripaska, the Russian, but these Ukrainians. And he was trying to figure out ways to get paid because Manafort spent a long time working in Ukraine. And by the way, when he was in the Ukraine, as we've talked about, Jimmy, he was not pursuing Russian interests, as is widely said. He was actually trying to push his client, Viktor Yanukovych, away from Russia and to sign on to a trade deal with the European Union, which actually was the basis for this Euromaidan crisis that could have set off this whole new Cold War between the U.S. and Russia. So when it comes to the inciting issue that set off a massive new tension, new crisis between the U.S. and Russia, Manafort was on the U.S. side, and that's revealed in Mueller's indictment of Manafort.
I just want to kind of hammer on that point a little bit because this whole thing, it wasn't even him sharing polling data with Russians. He was sharing polling data that he wanted to get to these Ukrainian guys who owed him money. Right. Yeah. And why did he want to share that polling data with the guys who owed him money? Because they would go, hey, dude, I'm working with the guy who's going to be the most powerful guy in the world. Maybe you want to get on my good side and pay me that money you owe me.
Exactly right.
That's what that was. It had nothing to do with Putin. And by the way, let's say what the conspiracy theorists who say that Manafort was working with the Russians to give him this poll, let's say their theory is true. Then those Russians who took the polling data that he gave them and then did targeted ads that won the presidency for Donald Trump, those guys are the most amazing fucking advertising guys in the world. They were able to get Donald Trump elected president with a couple of fucking Facebook ads. Those guys are geniuses. You would think they would be controlling the whole world right now. In fact, if you listen to the RussiaGate people, Russia is controlling the whole world right now.
According to the Washington Post, in the last 5 weeks of the election, fewer than 1,000 people saw targeted Russian ads in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Fewer than 1,000 people saw an ad on Facebook.
Yeah. And we've seen these ads, Jimmy. They're
ridiculous.
Like one of the most popular ads was said, if you believe in Jesus, give it a like. One of the most popular ones was of a gun wielding Yosemite Sam saying, if you miss me, it was something about how it was a pro gun ad featuring Yosemite Sam. So these were the ads, sophisticated Russian ads that we're supposed to believe.
It was I saw one with an ad with Jesus trying to get you to stop masturbating.
Exactly. Yes,
he said he'll give you a hand. That was actually in the ad. And so these are the things that were supposed to swing these are the geniuses in Russia who got the polling data. So you see how crazy. And the reason why I keep exposing this and over, I'm actually getting tired of it, is that it's so crazy how everyone just fucking repeats it and buys into it. It is so nuts. And you want to see how nuts it is? Here's the Talking Points memo. Here's Josh Marshall at Talking. He's one of the biggest RussiaGaters there is. Anyway, he says, Deripaska, that's the person Manafort was originally in the original New York Times story, said he was passing this information to, but he wasn't. This was a mistake. So this guy, Deripaska, is close to Putin, and he has zero use for campaign data about a U.S. election other than to use it for the then ongoing Russian campaign to elect Donald Trump. That was in Talking Points memo. That was in there. He should be embarrassed. They're not. Nobody's embarrassed. None of these RussiaGaters are embarrassed. If I was him, I wouldn't be embarrassed, but he's not. And I'm a nightclub comedian, and he's a big shot smarty pants who runs a frickin' magazine. I don't. I'm an asshole in his garage, and I would be embarrassed, yet he's not. That's fucked up, and that's why I keep talking about this stuff. Here's one more. Here's from the Washington Post. That's Max Boot. There was only one reason I can think of to help direct of why they would share this polling data. He says to help direct the covert social media propaganda campaign that Russian intelligence was running on Trump's behalf. That's the only thing they could think of. I can think of a million other reasons. I could actually think of the accurate one, which was they weren't giving it to Russia. They were giving it to the Ukraine billionaires because they owed Manafort money, and he wanted them to know that he was going to be in with the new president, and you better pay me that money. That's what that was all about. Of course, that goes right past Max Boot and Josh Marshall. They can't think of another reason why that would happen. And here is Charlie Sykes. Now, if you don't know who Charlie Sykes is, he hosts a radio show on the AM dial in Wisconsin because he's just that good. And so he spoke against Trump one time when he had him on his show during the primary, and he became famous because he was the one right-wing host who actually pushed back on Trump a little bit because he knew he was never going to get another interview anyway. So good for Charlie for doing that, and we covered it when it happened, but now he's being paraded around on MSNBC and everywhere else as a leader of the resistance when he's just another right-winger. And here he is. You want to show how mental this has gotten people? Here he is talking about how the data got to Russia and what they did with the data. You want to hear it? I only have to have
just the right vote.
So he goes, they had just the right data. They knew just when to use it. I had the front end of this clip is cut off. That's why I'm telling you what he said at the beginning. And so here it comes.
Just the right voters at just the right time in places like in Pennsylvania and in Michigan and in Wisconsin. How did they know where to go? How did they know what the messages were? How did they know how to target it? So
how did they didn't do any. $1,000 in ads on Facebook seen by 1,000 people. It's probably less than $1,000. It's probably like $400 or $500. They spent $4,000 on all Google platforms through the whole election over 2 years. A used Taurus costs more than that. And this is what these people, you hear how crazy this is? They knew just when, oh my God, they're the most brilliant campaign advertisers I've ever heard of in my life. They can switch an election with a couple of Facebook ads. Well, then why did fucking Hillary hire them? And who are these geniuses? They don't exist. But guys like this will go on TV. I mean, but it's not just him. It's all of them. Watch this. It gets worse.
I always thought that one of the keys was going to be, where did the data come from? Who gave them the data? What's the role of people like Cambridge Analytica? But here you have the chairman of the campaign handing data, during the election year to the Russians. This is
the Russians, just to the he's handing data to he was giving mostly already known public material to a guy who owes him fucking money in the Ukraine. That's what that was about. And here's these guys again. This is the kind of conspiracy theory shit they say happens on YouTube. No, this is the kind of shit that happens on MSNBC on the fucking regular. Every goddamn day, you got another jackoff like this guy or Rachel Maddow or Chris Chris Hayes or fake tough guy Lawrence O'Donnell, and they're all on there doing the same shit. And it's the crazy. How could you ever say Alex Jones is crazier than you when you fucking guys do this every day? This is mind-blowing. I'm not a real journalist, nor do I want to be one. But this guy is. Aaron, you're a real fucking journalist. You have stuff. You've been in many publications. People respect you, except now they're afraid that you keep asking for evidence. Is your head about to explode as much as my head is over this?
I meditate. Jimmy, it's not hard. It's ridiculous, and but it will be over at a certain point. It has to, because they can't keep this going forever. I want to say a few figures just to back on this Wisconsin, Pennsylvania thing, and Michigan. So the Russians spent a grand total of $3,102 in these three states before the election.
Three states.
Most of those ads had nothing to do with the election. If you read the recent Senate reports that came out, they note that election content was minimized and the candidates were barely mentioned. Most of these ads were ran way before the election in the primaries, and the total number of times that ads were targeted at Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania combined is less than they were targeted at the blue state of New York. So just to give you a window into the nature of this supposed sophisticated Russian operation, these dumb ads that weren't even about the election. That Josh Marshall article you mentioned, it was headlined "The Collusion Debate Ended Last Night."
Yes. Oh my God, that was the head. That was right. I wanted to show you guys that. Thanks for reminding me. I wanted to show them that graphic. The collusion debate ended last night. He said over this story, which a guy in his garage can debunk.
Yeah. Jimmy, let me just address one element of the story, which is the fact that Manafort wanted this sent to, which really actually the only Russian element we have here, which is that Manafort apparently, according to Mueller, asked for the polling data to be sent via his fixer, Konstantin Kilimnik, who is someone who Manafort worked with for many years. Kilimnik was Manafort's fixer and translator in Ukraine. Now, Mueller has alleged in a couple of court filings that Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence that were active during the 2016 campaign. He has not publicly specified what those ties are or explained what he means by that. But because Mueller has said that, that also is the basis for saying that Manafort wanted this public polling data passed on to the Russians. But there's a few things here. First of all, Kilimnik, if you look at his past, his only ties we know about to the Russian military is that back during the Soviet era, he trained as a translator and a linguist at a Soviet military school, because Kilimnik himself was actually born in Ukraine. Now, he might have Russian citizenship now, but he was born in Ukraine during the Soviet era. Okay, so he's actually, it's not even for sure that he's even a Russian citizen right now, but he certainly has worked there. Now, Kilimnik's record also includes working for many years at the International Republican Institute in Moscow, which is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is funded by the U.S. government. So Kilimnik also has U.S. government ties to such an extent that there was a long profile on Kilimnik in the Atlantic. This is like the definitive profile of Kilimnik so far that we've had by Franklin Foer in the Atlantic. And it notes that IRI officials in Washington, so the International Republican Institute, IRI officials in Washington relied on Kilimnik so much that they named him the acting director of the Moscow office. Okay, so that's part of Kilimnik's background, and he's leveraged all this into a career working for Manafort, where, as we said, Manafort and Kilimnik were pushing a pro-Western agenda in Ukraine, and he was doing this for the people who Manafort wanted this public polling data sent to, so he could get money from them. So it's quite obvious here that even if somehow this magical polling data could be used for some plot to influence the election, that there's a much more plausible explanation for why Manafort wanted it sent, which is that he wanted to collect money for the pro-Western work he was doing in Ukraine. And the fact that he communicated this to his Russian colleague doesn't necessarily mean that this was part of some Kremlin plot. I mean, think about the leaps of logic it takes to ignore all that, to then assume that this has to be because of a conspiracy. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And so I really want to I always thought that after the Iraq war that people like, the New York Times and Washington Post, I thought that they would be discredited and they would learn a lesson. They haven't learned any lesson whatsoever. They're worse than they ever were. And of course, now they have Trump as president who says the press is the enemy of the people. So now you can't ever criticize the press, or else they say you sound like Trump.
Exactly. We're caught between two really bad poles. I mean, Trump on the one side, and then a credulous corporate media that is choosing to basically parrot whatever the Democrats and intelligence officials say, who have their own motives that have nothing to do with challenging Trump based on his policies, but challenging Trump because they want to cover up for the failure of their own policies, and they want to actually oppose the maybe sliver of policies that Trump does that are actually maybe positive, like, for example, better relations with Russia and having peace on the Korean Peninsula. Mm-hmm. So we're caught, those of us who aren't in either camp, we're caught in the middle and we're suffering. And Jimmy, part of the problem is that right now in media, not only is it the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN that are going along with this, but it's also many of our progressive media colleagues. And you're basically one of the few outlets right now that are willing to stand up and to question the motives here and to ask for evidence. And so that's unfortunately part of the problem.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a part of the problem. When exposing the biggest propaganda campaign in my lifetime, because that's what this is. When it falls on people's shoulders like me, we're in fucking trouble. I'll tell you that. But Aaron, thank you for being my guest. That's his article. If you want to go read it, go to The Nation magazine. Thanks for being our guest, Aaron.
Thanks, Jim.
If you like our content, looking for ways to help support, here's a great mug or a t-shirt or a thing. You can get it right underneath there, or you can become a patron to our show. We give you hours of bonus material every week. Plus, come see a live Jimmy Dore show. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all our live shows, and make sure you're subscribed. I know it sounds crazy, but they unsubscribe people from our show all the time, and you have to click that bell so they send you a notice when we drop a video. Thanks for your support.